Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says disinformation is a cybersecurity threat. This article here is speaking about cybersecurity and disinformation. It initially starts off by explaining what is it about cybersecurity. There are a number of means and mechanisms as to how cyber attacks can be initiated by the hackers. When there is cyber attacks initiated, this ultimately means the integrity of the computer network is compromised and there can also be data theft as well. This can result in fiduciary relationship getting violated. This can result in data theft as well, and this can also lead to economic losses. So we have what is called as the cyber security measures which have been taken care by the countries as well as by organizations. Similarly, we also need a framework for disinformation to be minimized in a particular social environment is what is this article all about. First, let us try and understand what is cybersecurity the article is trying to speak about. Cybersecurity, as the very name denotes, cyber is about computers, it is about computer networks, it is about our digital lives. How are we protecting the cyber network? The computer systems is what is called as cybersecurity. So cybersecurity is the protection of the internet connected systems that includes the hardware, the software and data from any of the cyber attacks as well as the cyber threats. So basically, in order to bring an end to the cyber attacks, what we have is called as the cyber security. Then what we have to focus is on disinformation. What is this disinformation? Disinformation is an attack on the cognitive ability of a particular person. So whenever there is an agenda, whenever there is hatred that is being spread, whenever there is social discord, increased polarization, or in some cases which influence the outcome of an election on the basis of propaganda, on the basis of lies, on the basis of fake information, that is what is called as disinformation. So basically, when we are speaking about disinformation, this is nothing but one of the effective tools employed in the present 21st century. Why? To polarize the society and to upset the economic and the democratic processes in a particular region. So when it comes to disinformation, we have to understand a general difference between disinformation and misinformation. What is the difference between disinformation and misinformation? When it comes to information that is false, that is deliberately created, which can harm a particular person, which can harm a section of the people or a section in that particular society or the social group, that is what is called as disinformation. So the intent of this information is to harm a particular person. But when it comes to misinformation, yes, this particular information is false. This particular information may not be true as well. But the intent of the misinformation is not to harm an individual or not to harm a region or a country. So when it comes to disinformation, it generally means that there is a particular information which is ideally created, circulated and present within a particular region just because they have to brew hatred in the society. But when it comes to misinformation, yes, the information might be false as well, but this information's original intent is not to harm an individual. So that is the basic difference between disinformation and misinformation. So the author in this particular case draws a similarity when it comes to the strategies, tactics and actions between the cybersecurity and disinformation. When we speak about cybersecurity, we have number of protocols, measures, countermeasures that we take up. Similarly, when disinformation as a campaign is taken by certain sections of the people, we also require the counter strategy is what this article is speaking about. When we speak about cybersecurity, how cyber attack is initiated, that is through the use of computer infrastructure. Let's say for example, there is a particular loophole, or let's say for example, there is a particular bug or there is a vulnerability that which is present within a computer system or within a particular application, or there is a software developmental issue. So what do? They identify that there is a computer infrastructure, there are certain vulnerabilities, there are certain loopholes in that particular software. They try to exploit this particular loophole in that particular computer infrastructure, or at the same time they may also execute a cyber attack by means of malware, virus, Trojans, or it can also be by botnets or social engineering as well. That is how cybersecurity and attacks takes place when it comes to cybersecurity. But now we have to focus on the similar parallel, which has to be about disinformation attack. How does disinformation work? Basically, they hit on the cognitive bias of that particular person. What is this cognitive bias? Let's say, for example, we all have our own intellectual capacity. We also try to get to a particular conclusion because we have certain facts, because we have read something as well. So this is about the mental capacity, the mental action, and the information processing within our thought process. So basically, when we speak about cognitive action, it is about intelligent activity or the mental action of that particular process. But what does disinformation do? It hits on the cognitive ability. Let's say, for example, I do not have much information about a particular issue, that which is prevalent in the particular society. Let's say, for example, we are speaking about farm bills, or let's say, for example, any other bill that is in picture. So what do? There is a particular propaganda where false lies is spoken about farm bills, or there is an agenda to infuriate certain people within that particular society. So I do not have the intelligence, I do not have an idea about this particular bill, but what do the propagandas do or disinformation do? It infuriates the society. So this particular information is manipulated, miscontextualized, misappropriated, and when this information is given to people who have very less information about that particular program or the bill, they get infuriated. So what are we doing here? We are putting in a strong preconceived notion into that particular person. So what we are basically doing is changing the perception of that particular person. So what is the perception? He has very limited or less knowledge, so we are changing that particular perception of that particular person according to what our agenda is. That is what is called as a propaganda, where there is lies that is sent to another person, which is called as cognitive biasness. When cybersecurity attacks does take place, what we have is called as hacking. So what is hacking? Hacking is stealing of information, data theft, and when it is done with respect to disinformation, that is what is called as cognitive hacking. So what is cognitive hacking here? We are actually changing or stealing away certain data of that particular person or changing the perception, which is what is called as cognitive hacking. So the author here draws a parallel, draws a comparison, says when there is cybersecurity and issues, similar issues are also present when it comes to disinformation as well. So when it comes to cognitive hacking, this is nothing but a digitally crafted propaganda which manipulates the perception of that particular person by spelling out the disinformation to a certain section or to an individual or to a particular country. So this attack exploits all the psychological vulnerabilities, perpetuates biasness, and eventually compromises logical and critical thinking, giving rise to what is called as cognitive dissonance. So basically, this is done in order to galvanize a large section of the people, disrupt harmony in the society, exploit cognitive biasness, and prepare the people to go against the government. And the ultimate goal is to manipulate the way people perceive the reality. One such example that we can look at is with reference to the Capitol siege that happened in the United States of America. When such issues of cognitive hacking takes place, what we will have is huge disruptions in the society. Let's take some of the examples. US 2020 presidential elections was fraudulent, said few people, which is why we also had the US Capitol siege. Then there were few people who did not believe that there was COVID-19 virus. This prevented people from wearing masks, using potentially dangerous alternative cures, and they were not ready to get vaccinated as well. Such is the position when it comes to cognitive hacking. So what the author says is, whenever there is cyber attack, it might impact a person, it might impact an organization, it might also impact major number of people as well. But when it comes to what is called as cognitive hacking or disinformation, a huge number of people people are galvanized, and ultimately one community is pitted against the other, one caste is pitted against the other, people are pitted against the government. So what we will have is social disharmony, which can ultimately lead to violation of public order, says the author, which is where he also draws another parallel as well. That is in reference to the distributed denial of service. What is this distributed denial of service? When it comes to the cyber security, let's say you want to access Facebook, or let's say you want to access one of the websites. So what exactly happens is you have your particular system, it sends information to the server to which it wants to access. Let's say I have a particular IP, or let's say I have my particular system, so my system will have a particular IP. So what will it do? It will ping another server so that it can communicate with the server of Facebook. But what will distributed denial of service do? Huge amount of package is sent such that there is huge traffic that is created. So ultimately your system will not be able to reach the server, but you are midway and not able to reach the server, so that there is denial of service. So the service that you wanted was to access Facebook, but because there is a hacker who has sent huge amount or package of this particular information, the traffic is too much, and as a result the original intent of the hacker is to make sure that this person does not access that particular server and that particular website. Similarly, when there is disinformation, the author goes on to say that huge amount of false data is put up in the general forum. There is right data, there is factual data, there is truth as well, but ultimately there is false narrative and there is lies which takes the upper hand over the truth. More the truth, more will be the people who will believe that particular fact as truth, but more the lies, more number of people will assume the lie to be the fact, says the author. So what he says is, more number of people, if they are flooding the data, more number of people are giving the false information, it is this false information that is fed to the people, says the author. In order to overcome this particular issue, he draws a comparison once again with respect to cyber security measures and how measures will also have to be taken with respect to the disinformation. So what are the lessons that we can draw when it comes to the cyber security? Whenever a particular application, or for example a software is developed, or for example IT and internet systems are being developed, initially the developers might not know what are the loopholes in that particular system or in that particular organization's network infrastructure. Eventually down the lane, they come up with some of the security best practices. Why? They would have identified that there is a loophole, and because they have identified that loophole, they are able to come up with measures that which is prevalent in the security infrastructure. So what do? They develop rigorous security framework, they come up with guidelines, they prescribe standards for the people, and also follow all the best practices as well. In fact, when you look at cyber security, they have what is called as the red team and the blue team. What is this all about? Let me give you an example. Let's say red team is about offensive strategy, and when it comes to blue team, it is about defensive strategy. So what exactly happens? Let's say for example there is a particular company. Let's say for example Facebook. If I am a hacker, I want to access Facebook, or I see there is a bug in Facebook, so I want to steal information of people in Facebook. So what exactly happens? There are ethical hackers who are employed in the red team. These act as the genuine hackers, and at the same time there is blue team as well. With this blue team is actually working for the company as a defensive program. So what do? They fight against each other, they find out if there is any system loophole or there are bugs and issues within this application, and ultimately they'll fix all the vulnerabilities that which is prevalent in that application or in their security architecture. Apart from this, whenever we speak about cyber security, we have what is called as information sharing and analysis centers and global knowledge hub as well. One such example is what is called as the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace. So what is this Paris Call for Cyber Security? Basically, there are n number of issues when it comes to cyber security. There can be attacks for cybercrime, there can be action taken by state actors as well as non-state actors, there can be theft of personal information, compromise of information as well. In order to overcome all these issues, what we have is the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace. So basically, these attacks are becoming increasingly increasingly sophisticated and intense. So what we require is a cooperation from the international community. So one such international community where they all come together, fight out the menace in the cyber security is what is called as Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace. So what we require is the global knowledge base in order to fight cyber security threats. Then we also have what is called as the Christchurch call to action to eliminate terrorist and violent extremist content online as well. This is once again where there are certain action points on cyber platform which can instigate people. This can give rise to extremist viewpoints and they may ultimately take up arms against the innocent people because someone else has instigated them. All this means there are countries who are party to this particular issue. In the similar way, what we require is, for the sake of disinformation, countries will have to come together. They have to come up with some of the mechanisms like ISACs to share the identity, content, context, actions and behaviors of the people who spread this disinformation, says the author in this particular case. So what is that we have to do? We have to study the strategy and tactics to understand the identities of the malicious actors. Who is doing it? Why are they doing it? What is their agenda? What is that they are planning to meet with their agenda? So what is the lies that they are spreading? So understanding of the malicious actors will have to be taken into picture so that we can fight them. So what we require is understanding of their agenda and the global community coming together as well. Then another principle of cybersecurity is what is called as defense in depth. What is this defense in depth? Basically, this is a step-by-step approach to make sure that the cyber architecture is intact and there is no infiltration of the virus or any other hacking person. So what do we do? First, for example, security firewalls will be the first line of defense. Eventually, we will also have the antivirus systems as well. Then we also have the regular patching as well. What is this regular patching? Let's say, for example, the operating system advancement, what they also do is come up with vulnerability fixing as well. So they write new code so that in case of vulnerability, the same is addressed in the operating system as well as in its application. So this is what is called as defense in depth when it comes to the cyber security and addressing the vulnerabilities. Similarly, what we also require with respect to disinformation is what is called as the defense in step, where we have to identify the disinformation actor. We have to make sure that there are tools and mechanisms to prove the authenticity of the information. Then this information will require not only one particular platform but a more coordination from different set of platforms as well. If it is one single platform which is trying to come up with a solution, there will be other platforms which can counter it as well. So what we require is a coordination on the basis of different stakeholders, where the government steps in, where the private organization steps in, where the civil society steps in, where you have people who are given the basic education about what is called as disinformation. So basically what we require is the coordination where education becomes the key. Media literacy will have to be given to the people. Context, motivation and information will have to be challenged by the people. For this, what we require is a concerted and the coordinated approach. So taking advantage of all the frameworks that we currently have, expanding on it, enhancing on it and bringing the global community into picture so that disinformation does not harm the social harmony is what is this article all about. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says media as target. The article here is speaking about how media has been targeted by the executive and what are the violations with respect to this particular issue. We have the Enforcement Directorate. It had recently conducted raids at the offices of newsclick.in, which happens to be one of the independent media, that which is located in Delhi. Apart from raiding the offices, it also headed to the homes of the editors as well in relation to what is called as foreign funding. So this particular article currently goes on to say that there were certain violations with respect to foreign funding, that which was inherently present within the offices of newsclick.in, and that is why officers were raided and the editor-in-chief was also raided as well. Now the question is, yes, Enforcement Directorate has every means and mechanisms and statutory provisions that which is accorded to Enforcement Directorate to actually conduct such an activity with respect to the foreign funding. The article currently goes on to say that this particular tool has been periodically used by the executive where they actually let go the Central Bureau of Investigation, the Enforcement Directorate, the income tax officers, and even the National Investigation Authority, which have been used. Why? To intimidate the journalists and suppress adversarial journalism. So what do we mean by it? Let's say for example, there is a particular newspaper outlet, or let's say for example, there is one of the visual media television channels as well. In case they have gone against the government, they have reported something which is contrary to what is being projected by the government. In such a scenario, we have seen instances where all these executive statutory bodies have been used to intimidate the journalists, says this article. Kindly note, this is the views as expressed by the author. And this particular author further goes on to say, when they are intimidated, when their actions are suppressed, this ultimately means there is right to fundamental rights which are violated, and ultimately Article 19 is violated, which means the very fundamentals of the country are also violated. The author further takes into picture what is called as the executive role as well. We know for the fact that Supreme Court of India has spoken about the Central Bureau of Investigation as the caged parrot. Why caged parrot? Whatever the government wants, the CPI does that particular work for the government. That is why it was called as the caged parrot. Why? Because it was not independent. It was just listening to the master as well, and the master happens to be the government or the executive. In the similar instance, what we have to remember is, as we discussed in our daily quiz in today's session, there was one of the articles with respect to Unlawful Activities Prevention Act as well as sedition as well. What is the issue all about? That there are number of people who are arrested and booked under various provisions of Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, and there are people who are also booked under sedition cases as well. Once it hits to the court of law, the court of law looks into this particular case as well, and eventually only 2.2% were convicted under the Lawful Activities Prevention Act. And similar is the instance when it comes to sedition as well. The conviction rate with respect to the individuals who were booked or there were cases against individual with respect to sedition is also abysmal as well, which ultimately means that because there is an agenda that which has to be fulfilled, there are journalists who are intimidated, and as a result, the author goes on to say there has to be restraint when it comes to the executive action. So going forward, in order to make sure that there is transparency in the system so that media acts as the fourth pillar of the democracy, the government will have to be responsible enough, says this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says origin and spread. The article here is speaking about COVID-19, its origin, and the conspiracy theories of COVID-19. When COVID-19 started spreading from China to major countries of the world and almost all the countries of the world, what we actually witnessed is there were certain sections of the scientific community, there were even organizations, there were even countries who started voicing opinion against China. What did they say? They came up with a hypothesis of their own which said that COVID-19 was not a natural virus, but instead it was originated or it was produced in the laboratory settings. But in this present article, we have scientists from the World Health Organization who went to China to investigate the mysteries of this particular pandemic. They now have gone on to clarify that this is not originated from the laboratory settings, but instead this is from a natural reservoir which happens to be from the batch, or it can also be from another species, says the scientific community. What else did the scientific community say? So they have dismissed the lab origin theory and they have gone on to say how and when the virus was first transferred to the humans is yet to be deciphered. Virus was transferred through live animals or imported via frozen food products from outside the mainland is yet to be deciphered. So the article currently goes on to say that the scientific community has only clarified that the natural reservoir happens to be bat, but the transmission has not directly taken place from the bat to the humans, but through an intermediate host. But they are yet to understand which is this intermediate host as well. But we also have to understand for the fact that when it comes to China, we have always had some issue areas and concerns and transparency issues and how China operates because of its opaque authoritative government. When it comes to China, China was not transparent during the 2003 SARS outbreak, and in the present scenario once again during the COVID-19, China again has not been transparent, says this article. So it was found that the Chinese officials had suppressed, in fact deliberately withheld all the information from the public perspective and also from the international perspective as well. It took the Chinese delegation at least 1 year to let the World Health Organization and its scientists to enter China as well. So what they have to do is to cooperate in the near future. Already enough damage has been done. So going forward, cooperation is the only means and mechanisms for China, says this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about Medical Termination of Pregnancy Amendment Bill 2020. We have discussed about this particular bill in one of our CNAs. The link for the same will also be provided in our description box, so kindly look into it. When it comes to abortion law in India, the major laws that we currently have is the MTP Act of 1971. Before this particular legislation was passed, there were certain legal loopholes as well. Women were not able to abort the baby and the fetus as well. So what they went through is some unsafe abortions. Because they had to go through the doors of unsafe abortions, what we had is the increasing cases of maternal mortality rate. In order to overcome this particular issue, what we have is the MTP Act of 1971. What is this MTP Act of 1971? It allows unwanted pregnancy to be terminated up to 20 weeks of pregnancy and requires a second doctor's approval if the pregnancy is beyond 12 weeks. So what exactly is happening with the introduction of the bill? This particular 20 weeks of pregnancy has been upgraded to 24 weeks of pregnancy under the 2020 bill. But now the question is, what if the women after 24 weeks of pregnancy, if she still does not want this pregnancy to be a successful? So the author in this particular case goes on to say that the woman does not have the choice for her body. She cannot abort the baby, and ultimately this will result in more unsafe abortions, says the author. She goes on to say unsafe abortions are the third largest cause of maternal deaths in India. If this particular bill introduces only 24 weeks, does not respect the women's viewpoints, and does not let the women completely end the pregnancy even after 24 weeks, in such a scenario, what we will have is more unsafe abortion, says the author. The author further brings into another perspective as well. In case the woman wants to end the particular pregnancy after 24 weeks, she has to go to the judiciary. She has to go to the judiciary and convince that she is facing a mental trauma. But we have instances or cases where the judiciary has not listened or in fact complied by the arguments of the women as well. In fact, the opposite party will always be the state. The state in certain cases has also gone by the argument that she had engaged in a voluntary sexual activity. She knew what would be the consequences of it. Because she knew the consequences, now she need not have to eliminate that particular baby or end the pregnancy. And in such a scenario, when arguments were put forward by the state, in all those cases, the judiciary has just listened to the state as well. Which means if the judiciary is not the last resort for the women, this ultimately will harm the women and this may lead to unsafe abortions as well. This particular bill further raises the issue of patriarchal mindset as well. When you look into this particular bill, the proposed amendment still requires one doctor to sign off on termination of pregnancy up to 20 weeks and two doctors for pregnancies between 20 to 24 weeks. So it is not the viewpoint of the individual, viewpoint of the woman and her choice, but it is the signatures of the doctors that mandate, which is actually pushing the very idea of patriarchy, says the author. The author further goes on to speak about fetal abnormalities. Let's say, for example, after 24 weeks, in case there are fetal abnormalities, in such a scenario, the pregnancy can be eliminated as well. That is through a formal process of health. But in the present scenario, the author goes on to say, when we speak about fetal abnormalities, why not give the same consideration of personal choice? In fact, if you don't give that personal choice, it may also lead to domestic violence, it may also lead to death of the partner, says the author. The final issue the author speaks about is that when we speak about abortion, it is only focusing on the women throughout the particular bill, but it does not speak about abortion to the transgender, intersex and gender diverse persons. So this once again is not taking into picture the third gender, says this particular article. So the abortion rights which are central to the women's autonomy should be determined by that particular woman. It is her choice, she has the very choice, her choice will have to be given to her, and if the state is stripping away this particular right, what we will see is more number of deaths which is resulting because of abortion issue, says the author. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. First question, balancing freedom of speech with dangers of disinformation is a challenge for policymakers and regulators. Discuss innovative methods that could assist in limiting the spread of disinformation. Second question, the abortion laws in India does not treat women as adults who are responsible for their own choices. Analyze. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review, give positive feedback to your friends' answers, encourage them to write more. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.